For the next 5 minutes, I'd like to take you on a journey through time, and it's a journey that begins with a theory. The theory that the world is controlled by a shadowy cabal of devil-worshipping, baby-eating, reptilian shapeshifters who can all trace their descent from Alexander the Great. Now, it's just the last part of this theory that I find compelling and maybe even plausible. The idea that there are people walking around today for whom it's possible to construct a family tree going step by step by step back through the generations to a man who lived 2,300 years ago. Can we construct such a chain of people? And can we do it using the Wikipedia? Now, in the Wikipedia, there are pages and pages and pages of biographies. And we'll notice that many of these biographies contain links to other related people. So an idea might start to form in our minds that we could write some kind of web crawler that would start from a well-connected person, like the Queen, and then go to all of her relations following these hyperlinks, and then iterate on that. And so build up a gigantic family tree and hopefully find a line somewhere going all the way back to Alexander the Great. Now, it turns out that there is a better way to do it, and it involves something called the Semantic Web. And we can think of the Semantic Web as the machine-readable part of the Internet. And there is a Semantic Web equivalent of the Wikipedia, and it's called the DBpedia. And it's actually a giant graph database containing all of the same information as the Wikipedia, but in a machine-readable form that hopefully we're a bit familiar with based on that earlier talk. Now, the data is stored in a format called RDF, and we can query that data using a language called Sparkle. So now our path is reasonably clear. We construct a Sparkle query, very much like the friend of a friend query that Coraline was talking about earlier in relation to Twitter, except instead of connecting up Twitter followers with each other in an iterative way, we connect up family members with each other, starting from the Queen. And we cheat a little bit by allowing ourselves family members who are related by marriage to cast the net as widely as possible. We wrap it up in some Ruby code, we run it, the result is we get back a huge network of thousands and thousands of people, which is quite fun to scan through because it is a who's who of bad guys. We have Lady Macbeth, we've got the Borgias, we've got Genghis Khan for some reason, we've got Rollo out of Vikings, and then lurking at the very end is Arnold Schwarzenegger. What the hell is he doing here? How is he related to the Queen? Well, he's not really related to the Queen. I'm sure she'd be glad to hear that he's actually at a safe distance of an uncle, 3 marriages, and a 5th cousin once removed, as we can prove by taking 2 nodes and seeing how they hook together, like I've done here. Now, what about our original question? Were we able to trace a connection back to Alexander the Great? Well, we were able to get back quite far. We get back about as far as the Dark Ages, but then we start to run into people like the Vikings, like the Visigoths, like the Vandals, people who are very good at burning and pillaging and terrorizing the Romans and Byzantines, but not so good at forging the kind of marriage relationships that would let us link up the descendants of Alexander the Great with the ancestors of the royal houses of Europe. Very annoying. So how far back did we get? Well, we get back to a 6th century bishop. Not a baby-eating bishop, but a beer-swilling bishop called Arnulf of Metz, who is in fact considered by the Catholic Church a patron saint of beer. So with little more than a database query, I've been able to establish that the Queen's earliest traceable ancestor is the patron saint of beer, which I think is pretty cool. And I also think that there's a bigger picture here, because all that I've done is just connect up people with people. But in this enormous semantic web world, I could connect people up with all sorts of other things. I could connect them up with historical events, with places, with ideas. And if I could do that, it seems to me that I could start to actually uncover new historical truths to actually do history by data mining the semantic web. Thank you very much.
In the interest of full disclosure, I do work for Sky, and they have sponsored the conference. So palms have been greased to get me on stage, but they didn't grease mine, so I get to talk about whatever I want. Thus, programming and paragliding. So I want to start out with a story. When I was younger, I saw the movie Fly Away Home, which is about a girl and some geese, and she finds these geese and steals her father's airplane in order to fly them south for the winter so that they don't starve and freeze. And so I saw her. She was about 10 years old, and I was about 10 years old, and I thought, I want to do that. So along with Nerf guns and super soakers, I would put a glider on my Christmas list every year. And so sure enough, Santa would come through with the Nerf guns and the super soakers, but it didn't ever come through for the paraglider. So I had to make that happen for myself. And so after a couple years as a software engineer in Chicago, I finally had enough money to do that. And it turns out that while I originally thought that you had to run off a cliff or run off a big mountain in order to get up in the air, there's actually another way. So to give you an idea of what that looks like, I'll show you this short little clip here. So I'm starting out, I'm pulling this behind me, it'll come up above me, and you can see in front of me there's a van. So I found this guy out in the cornfields of Illinois with a van, and on the back of the van is a winch, and so the winch is pulling me into the air. And you can see it's a little bit jarring, but there it is up in the air above me, and that's what's holding me up into the air. After about 5 minutes, you get towed up to about 2,000 feet. And that gives you a different perspective. It looks a bit like this. So you pull a pin, you release from the line, and then you're allowed to just fly. And the way it works is the sun heats up the ground, which causes these pockets of warm air. And the warm air is a lot like the condensation that you'd see on the side of a glass. So if you take your finger and run against the glass, you can see the droplets falling on your finger. And if you tilt that 90 degrees, that's the same concept of the way thermals work. So something will trigger the warm air to release up into the rest of the atmosphere. And that is what gives you lift. So you can stay in the air for quite a long period of time. So my first cross-country flight, Yarrow, a self-described Czechoslovakian, pulls me up into the air and sticks into my pocket a variometer, which beeps with the rate of ascent. So as you're rising faster, you get higher-pitched beeps that beep more often. And so armed with nothing other than this variometer and the knowledge that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, I take off. So I reach the top of the thermal, the beeping calms down, and so I radio back down to Yarrow and say, hey, Yarrow, I've reached the top of the thermal. What do I do now? And he says, oh, that's great. You're about 7,000 feet up in the air, so over a mile. Pick somewhere and go. And so I did just that. And when you're up in the air, you have a lot of time to think to yourself. It's a very meditative state. I got to fly with some hawks and see things fly past me like a garbage bag that somehow managed to get up about 3,000 feet. And eventually, about 3.5 hours later, and about 35 miles further away, I land next to a highway at the back of a Taco Burrito King. And so I call up Yarrow, and I say, hey, Yarrow, this is where I'm at. And he couldn't believe it, but he came and picked me up, and we had tacos for dinner. So programming and paragliding are often solitary activities. And when you start out on a programming excursion, you don't necessarily know where you're going to end up. Similarly, so experiences like this, actually, they lift us up. They are a thermal. They energize us. And I'm excited about going back to programming now, getting to learn about new things that I've been inspired by today. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're all flying, and we may not know where we're going, but the thermals are out there, so let's keep flying. Thank you.
There once was a man from Dunoon who used to eat soup with a fork. Gets a bit odd after this. The swordfish fly across the sky. There's thousands of melting cloaks. Now, most people would have a look at this poem and think that it's gone a little bit off the rails. Something about it is not how we expect it to be. Now, when things go wrong, we need to have a look and have a conversation about what's gone wrong, how we intend to prevent it in the future, and crucially, how to fix the work we've already done. Now, the first line is completely conventional. We know exactly what to expect, and it's a bit more than that. It's a signifier. We have told people what kind of form we are working in, so they know what to expect in the following lines. And if we look at the specs, of course, it's passing everything, because it's 8 syllables long, there once was a something from somewhere, it's entirely conventional, well tested over time. First line's fine. Now, on the second line, we've diverged from that convention just a little bit. And we can see it's only failing one spec, which is whether or not line 2 rhymes with line 1. So we've taken a step away from convention. And in order to make that work, we've had to take yet another step away. And then another one. It's also validated in the database, by the way. And if we have a look at the specs, there's a few of them failing, but that's fine. And look at all those green specs. They're all passing. It's fine. And now we've worried too much about convention or lack of convention. We're under a tight time constraint to release the Limerick, and we can't do that without line 5. And it's about now we realise we've backed ourselves into a corner. And we need to bring in a new word, the word cloaks. Now, it's not a word I've used before or since, so it's a bit of an unknown quantity. And not a lot of work has gone into it. It's only got 4 commits. And it's not developed as part of a community the way that words do, which means that not only are people not fixing the problems, no one's even looking to see if there are any. But nevertheless, we ship it. You can see, passing most of the specs, and that's fine. And so we ship this, and the customer is not happy. They're not unhappy about the specs that are failing because the customer did not ask for a Limerick. The customer asks for a joke delivery system, and we haven't given it them. We've forgotten to add this spec, which is the one thing our customer cares about. And, of course, the one thing you can't do is completely ignore customer requirements. So we need to go look back at what we've done, and it's now we realise there is spaghetti. We can't just change the last line and fix everything. We need to go back and correct it. Now, according to our specs, these 4 lines have errors. And if we choose to consume it in the same order that the end user will, that's your problem right there. Soup with a fork. Now, I like that I wrote eat soup with a fork. That's a great phrase. In fact, I like lines 2, 3, and 4. And I especially don't want to rewrite 80% of the project. That's just like doing it all again from scratch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at line 1, which is completely conventional. There is nothing wrong with line 1. It's a time-tested form. It's got a funny-sounding Irish place name in it. It's a good start, but it's not the right start to this Limerick right here. So if we accept that maybe this was not a good fit, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's not a good fit, we can fix this whole poem with one simple patch. And it now reads, there once was a panther from Cork who used to eat soup with a fork. The swordfish fly across the sky, and the chicken was outlined in chalk. Now, it's not a very good one, but that is a punchline. So the customer's happy. It passes all the specs, so the company's happy. I've kept all my good surrealist lines in the middle, so I'm happy. You, the end users, are indifferent. Nevertheless, we finished the project. It's all good. So what's all this got to do with software development? Oh, look, I seem to be running out of time. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. I will talk a little bit about the Manifesto for Responsible Software Development. And the main question I've been asking myself and other people since years is, are we taking the world in the right direction? So software is everywhere today. You can't buy a car without software. No plane flies without software. No whatever. Look around you, software is everywhere. We the software developers, we are the people who shape the world today. And are we doing the right things? There are people who have asked themselves these questions before. Physicists several thousand years before. Engineers in the 1920s asked themselves this question. I'm not sure. So last year I wrote the Manifesto for Responsible Software Development with some other people. I've never done something like that before, so I looked at the Agile Manifesto and I wrote all the first subscribers and authors and asked them, how did you do it, what did you do? And some of them helped me. So Dave Thomas and Annie Hunt were main contributors from the first day. So here it is. The main point is, I am responsible for the stuff I do. When someone uses software that I wrote and it's part of a missile guiding system, and someone steals that missile and uses it to bring down a civil plane. So perhaps I should have asked myself if it's a good idea to make missiles that good. So weapons are a questionable point. One big thing is civil rights and human rights. You can use software to do very bad things today. Remember the heartbleed bug. Nobody can understand SSL as good as the one who writes it. And when I write something that is distributed that far, I am the one who should ensure that it's good. Data storage is another point. Today, everyone stores everything just because he can. eBay has been hacked. Sony has been hacked. I don't know if I can protect my systems better than they can. So if I don't need to store some data, I shouldn't do it. And perhaps I can ensure that it's encrypted. When I just need an email address to validate someone, I can store it in a hashed version. So I can ask myself several questions to make things better. Just think about it. When you look just at Google, they use almost 3 gigawatt per year. That's a small nuclear plant just for Google. So when I write algorithms and they are distributed in a system like Google, small increases in performance can have a huge impact on energy. And finally, it's my decision. If I decide it's okay for me to build weapons, it's okay, but it's my decision. It's not okay to say I just wrote the algorithm, I'm not the one who pulls the trigger. When I build bad things, I'm responsible for the outcomes. I've wrote several articles about it. There is a website. You can sign it if you like the idea. I think the most important point is think about it, talk about it, and ask yourself what's the world you want to live in and what's the part you want to play in shaping the world. So that's it.
So this is a short story about how we've been trying to improve our hiring at Bytemark. Bytemark's my hosting company that's been building a cloud hosting platform the last 14 years, and it's just about an unusual improvement about how we recruit people, so I'd hope you find it interesting. There was this famous paper that was published or much cited paper in 1997 that shone a light on gender bias in hiring. And one of the sort of takeaway figures from it were that in 1970 there were less than, looking at the top 5 US orchestras, there were less than 5% of the musicians were women. And by 1991 that figure had risen to 25%. And the paper attributed that change to the creation of an anonymous audition process. That's where the candidates would come in, they'd take off their shoes so you couldn't hear them, whether it was high heels or clodhoppers or whatever, and they went and played their audition piece behind a screen. And the authors of the paper had access to all the candidate data from those anonymous auditions. And they found out, after compensating and doing all the statistical wizardry that statisticians do, they found that women were 50% more likely to advance to the second stage of an audition process than if the panel had been able to see them. And whenever we struggled to get the right person for hiring for a position at Bytemark, it set me thinking, how can we get better at this? We used to have a pretty ordinary interview process. We'd put some adverts out, we'd collect some CVs, we would get up in our Sunday best and sit around a table very cold and try and work out who would be the best person off the back of not very much. And so after reading that paper, I thought as long as we can set up a reasonable audition process for each candidate, we can assess their skills and interview them without ever meeting them, knowing their gender, age, or anything else. And I guess the goal I was aiming at was really just to make our hiring more precise and to make it more appealing to more people. We wanted to pick out the attributes that we wanted to hire for, be precise about those, and ignore those that we didn't. And everyone is wasting less time. So at the start of 2015, I hacked up a Rails application. It took sort of 4 or 6 weeks. Fairly unambitious because it was me doing it, and it needed all it needed was a bit of text messaging integration. And so what happens is the candidate just logs on to our careers website, and they sign up with just a mobile phone number and a pseudonym. And a little bit about why the candidate wants to work there, that sort of thing. And we text backwards and forwards to arrange an interview time, and our interview panel convene online, and we have an online chat with them. So by and large, we're just interviewing cartoon characters or Pokemons or just the variety of aliases that we get back. And we're really just trying to, at that point, just trying to find out their sort of enthusiasms, how they work, this kind of thing. And you're sort of stripped of a lot of the, how was the weather, how was the trip, the kinds of warm-up questions where, to my mind, sort of bias kind of gets started and gets a root in the interview process. And our interviews brief is just to kind of keep culture fit out of it. I mean, that's a whole other lecture I don't know enough about to talk about, other than to say we're not looking for culture fit. It was part of our brief to just to ignore it and focus on the work. So there is a second interview is centered around a skills test. That might be 2 or 3 hours building a small project to a spec for a programmer. It might be a lot of broken servers to fix for a system administrator, or research and summary jobs for an administration position. And that's done with screen sharing so that the candidate can just jump on and get started without any setup. Again, we're just looking at the work here. We're just talking backwards and forwards to a Pokemon or a member of the Starship Enterprise or whatever. We just see the work. And of course, that we have to commit our evaluations to paper at this stage, because at the end of every stage, because the last step is we whittle people down and we get down to the people that we actually want to meet in person. We bring the CV, we dress up, but it's the funnel is much narrower at this point. And the start of that interview means that we're back to starting on a note of confidence. We can talk about what we liked about your work. We can talk about previous conversations. We're continuing a conversation and not starting cold. So the feedback that we've had seemed to suggest that people were more confident coming into those than if they just stepped through the door of a new company. They were already engaged in something. I'll skip to sort of how it fared. I don't have. We're a bootstrap company. We've only hired 5 people in total in the last year, so it's not enough for a particularly great study. And we don't obviously have data on who the candidates were that apart from the ones that we hired. So we don't have enough data to really know. But it absolutely achieved the narrow result we wanted, which was to spread the work of hiring around the company and to make certain that we'd hired the best people, and for those people to have the confidence of the team. Skip that paragraph. And so, yes, lower bias, more candidates, more confidence in the results. We'll keep working on it. And we do have a vacancy for a front-end developer. So if you wanted to check out the process for yourself, it's at careers.bytemark.co.uk, or just catch me outside. 2 seconds. Yes.